Volume 1, History of Tuluva. Chapter 1, Beginnings. Summary: Derivation of the word with the aid of historical and traditional evidence. 2. Tuluva in the legend of Parashurama. Historical and traditional notices of the story of Parashurama. Number 3. Examination of the story relating to the alleged creations of Parashurama. The veracity of that part of the above story relating to the Sapta Konkanas examined. References to Tuluva in the epics and the Puranas. 6. Claims of Tuluva to antiquity based on epigraphs, writings of Tamil authors, and accounts of Greek geographers. Number 1. Derivation of the word Tuluva. Ancient Tuluva comprised the whole of South Canara and a part of North Canara. The misnomer of Canara was applied to the district only in comparatively modern times. Wilkes called Tuluva by the name Canara. Tuluva today is nearly 150 miles in length, about 25 miles broad in its narrowest, and 50 miles in its widest parts. But according to traditional as well as historical accounts, this province extended far beyond its modern limits in the north. The legendary origin of Malabar, as embodied in Keralotpatti, relates that the Tuluva Rajya commenced from Gokarna in the north as far as Perumpura in the south. From the evidence of inscriptions to which we shall advert in the course of this treatise, it will be seen that the northern limits of Tuluva, as given in the legendary accounts of Kerala, are by no means unreliable. In fact, so late as the 16th century AD, the people associated the land south of Mirjan, situated on an islet south of Ankola, on the Gangavadi river, with Tuluva. But the name Tuluva came gradually to be restricted to a smaller area till with the annexation of the district by the British in AD 1799, it was confined to a stretch of land bordered on the north by the forest line of Sirur and on the south by the town of Charavatturu. The origin of the word Tuluva remains still a difficult question. According to tradition, the name Tuluva is traced to the activities of a ruler called Bhojaraja, also known as Chandrasekhara. It is said that in order to please the Brahmins, he gave them munificent gifts like the Tula Purusha Dana, the Tula Dana, etc. Since he presented to the Brahmins, who had come from different provinces, gold weighing 100 tolas each, he was called Tula Bhara, Tula Raja, and Tula Desadipati, and the people over whom he ruled, the Tulu people. Further, the dynasty to which he belonged came to be known as the Tolar line. Kerala legends ascribe the name Tuluva to one Tulumban Perumal. This ruler, it is alleged, fixed his residence at Koteshwara, a prominent Shaivite seat in the northern part of Tuluva, just before Kerala was separated from Tuluva. The country was thenceforward called after his name. Starrock merely echoes the opinion of others that the word Tuluva could be traced to the word Tulu, meaning mild, humble, meek, etc. None of these explanations can be given any credence. We may dismiss the last one as being inadmissible both on historical and philological grounds. In the first place, the achievements of the Tulu people in historical times, as we shall presently narrate, bring out clearly a trait in the character of the early Tuluvas quite opposite to the one which is indicated by the ingenious explanation offered by Starrock. Moreover, there is no evidence to prove that the word Tulu, which is not in common use, as Starrock rightly remarked, was ever current among the Tulu people among themselves, and that they called the country which they inhabited by a name signifying a feature in their character which they did not possess. Turning to the other two explanations, we may note that the story of Rama Bhoja's munificence was evidently an invention of the Brahmins. while that of Thulamban Perumal, whose identity itself is a matter of speculation, was the result of confusion between the legends of Tuluva and those of Kerala. The word Tuluva may be derived from the Hale Kannada root Tulu, to attack, signifying thereby the nature of the ancient Tuluva people whose warlike activities in the early ages of history secured for them that appellation from their neighbors, the equally or perhaps more ancient Karnataka people. Evidence in support of this may be secured from their folklore, traditions, faith, games, and political history. The stirring sagas called Padadanas contain their folklore. Later part of this treatise, the activities of gallant men and women whose memories are even now cherished with legitimate pride and affection by the Tulu people. The unhistoricity of the derivation of the name Tulu from Tolara is seen when we note that the earliest variant of the name is Tolaha and not Tolara. This name Tolaha appears in an Alupa record dated AD 1140 to 41, 176 of 1901. The Perumals themselves were foreigners. Read Logan, Malabar Gazetteer, pages 230 and 244. The traditions of the Koragas, some of whom seem to have formed a part of the Tulu people, the Mailas, the Holeyas, the Mogars, and others, justify our assumption that they belonged to a warlike race. The traditions of the Koragars, for example, eulogize the deeds of a powerful Koragar king named Hubashika and of his nephew. We shall refer to them later in the course of this treatise. The legendary account of the Holeyas, as recorded in a narrative called Bahudanda, cited by Buchanan, states that a ruler who belonged to that tribe seized upon the country. In the same account, we are told that the Mogars, who now form the bulk of the fisherfolk of Tuluva, assisted the Holeyas. It is believed that the Mailas or Mallars were the rulers of the country. Ruined forts at Maddur, 4 miles to the north-northeast of Kasargodu, and at Kavu, 35 miles northeast of the same town, bear witness to the olden times when the warlike Tulu people conquered the country. Ample evidence can be gathered from their games in order to establish their claims for martial activities in the past. Sports like Ajakai Darpuni, Tappangai, the Ambodi Jatra, Korida Duju, Tute Dhara, Keddasa Festival, Chendu, and Bonte, these are the survivals of the far-off times when the militant Tulu people wrested the ownership of the land from the hands of the aboriginal inhabitants. Ajakai Darpuni is a favorite game among the Billavers and the Binbuds. Vignesh Illamma. Ajakai Darpuni is a favorite game among the Billavers and the Bunds. It is a contest between two persons who hold coconuts in their palms at a distance of about to 14 inches and bring the fruits one against the other simultaneously. In this game, the broken fruit is the property of the victor. The Tapangai is a game which is played in the open in front of a household. A coconut shorn of its fibers and well smeared with oil is thrown into the air. A scramble follows at a given signal among those present. The Javanere, as the youth of the locality are called, and the strongest retains it in his hands as a sign of victory. This game is common among all classes of people. But the Ambodi Jatra is a pastime which is seen only among the Holeyas. It is held at Ermal, Udayavara near Udupi, and Ballamanje. The Ambodi Jatra is a mock fight with staves about 3, sometimes 6 feet in length, representing swords between two parties. The Korida Juju or cockfight is indulged in by all classes of people except the Brahmins and the Jains. We have described it elsewhere in detail. An equally interesting and universal game is the Chendu, or a sort of football played during the famous Jatra at Polali. It is held on the occasion of the car festival which takes place on the Meena Sankramana, in the famous Rajarajeshwari Durga Parameshwari temple. Popular belief connects the play Chendu with the heads of the Daityas named Chanda and Munda. More interesting than the above is the torch fight called Tutedara, which is best seen in the Bappanadu Grama, a suburb of Mulki, Mangalore Taluka. It is held at night in front of the Durga Parameshwari temple at Bappanadu. Only two rival parties take part in it, the people of Bappanadu and those of Karnadu. The latter are led by the Gundal household, Manetana, while those of Karnadu by the Balehittalu and the Nadi Kuduru people. Each party consists of 70 to 90 men. They are stationed at a distance of about 50 feet. Torches of coconut leaves about 2.5 to 3 feet in length are prepared by the holayas of the respective villages. The combatants are expected to have taken a ceremonial bath and to have abstained from drinking liquor and eating meat. Every combatant has 2 to 3 torches at his disposal. At a given signal, the men of the Kambalasana light a torch and give it to the leader of the Bappanadu Grama. Angadi Sasana gives. On a second signal being given, the two parties throw at each other the lighted torches. The game lasts for about 15 minutes when the leaders of both parties end it. We are unable to determine the significance of this interesting and unique Tuluva game. An equally noteworthy sport of the Tulu people is the hunting excursion on the Keddasa days. This game is common to all the people and is held over the whole of the district. The Keddasa festival begins, according to some, on the 24th of the Tulu month of Mai, that is February or March, or according to others, on the 25th of Makara, that is on or about the 5th of February, and lasts for 3 days. It is held according to the popular conception to commemorate Mother Earth's purification. All the Tulu people suspend work on these days and go hunting boars, rabbits, and wild pigeons. Food prepared out of baked kudu or horse gram, Dolichos uniflorus, and rice is eaten during these 3 days. The term Bonte, Kannada Bete, is given to an ordinary hunting expedition conducted on a large scale by the chieftains of a locality. How heartily the Tulu chieftains conducted the Bonte will be seen when we shall describe the life of the people. The whole trend of events from early centuries of the Christian era down to the 16th century, and especially the rise of an indigenous principality which rested solely on the strength of Tuluva arms and which lasted till the 14th century, attest to the warlike nature of the Tuluva people in historical times. One significant phrase used in inscriptions in connection with them, as will be given in detail when we shall deal with the political history of the province, is that hostile rulers were like a submarine fire to the ocean of the Tuluva army. Tuluva Balajaladi Badavanalam adds to the testimony that is decidedly in favor of the early Tuluvas being considered as a people of aggressive habits. Tuluva in the legend of Parashurama. Tuluvanadu, or as it was known in early times, Alvakeda, was a unit by itself since the earliest ages, both according to tradition as well as history. It is entirely erroneous to assume with the compiler of the South Kannada manual that no definite historic record relating to South Kannada has been found of earlier date than the 8th or 9th century AD, and that it must certainly at one time have formed part of Kerala or Chera, the westernmost of the 3 ancient Dravidian kingdoms mentioned in the edicts of Emperor Ashoka. An inquiry into the origin of Tuluva as an independent unit brings us to the description of the personality and achievements of one of the most remarkable figures known to Hindu tradition. This was the famous Jamadagnya or Parashurama, as he was known more popularly, to whom is ascribed the existence of Tuluva as a separate historic province. The story of Jamadagnya or Rama, as he is called in the Mahabharata, briefly told is the following. Once King Kartavirya, also known as Sahasrabahu Arjuna, because he had been endowed with 1,000 arms by Dattatreya, ruler of the Haihaya tribes with his capital at Mahishmati, came to the hermitage of Jamadagni. He was received by Renuka, wife of the great Rishi, with all due respect. But Kartavirya, filled with the pride of his valor, in return to her hospitality, carried off along with him by violence the calf of the milch cow of the sacred traditions and cast down the tall trees surrounding the hermitage. Bhargava, on being told by his father about the cow, killed the king. The sons of Kartavirya revenged the death of their father by attacking the hermitage of Jamadagni and slaying the old rishi when Rama was away. Rama, in sorrow, vowed to extirpate the whole Kshatriya race. He killed the sons of Kartavirya and thrice 7 times cleared the earth of the Kshatriya caste, and with their blood filled the 5 large lakes of Samanta Panchaka, from which he offered oblations to the race of Brigu. Here he saw his sir once again, and on being told by him what to do, Rama offered a solemn sacrifice to the king of the gods and presented the earth to the ministering priests. To Kashyapa, he gave an the altar made of gold, 10 fathoms in length and 9 in height. With the permission of Kashyapa, the Brahmins divided it into pieces among themselves, and they were thenceforward called Khandavayana Brahmans. The story, as told in the Rajadharma section of the Shanti Parva, adds that when Jamadagna had given the earth to Kashyapa, the latter desired him to depart, as there was no dwelling place for him in it, and to repair to the seashore of the south. It was here that the ocean relinquished to Rama the maritime district of Surparaka or Shurparaka. It must be remembered that the Shurparaka region is distinctly said to be the creation of Parashurama. Thus, in the Shanti Parva, Tataha Shurparakam Desham Sagaraha Tasya Nirmame Sahasa Jamadagnyasya Soparante Mahitalam. With the above story, which is narrated in the Mahabharata and repeated in the Puranas, we may proceed with our narrative. Of all the versions of the story as given in the Puranas, that narrated in the Sahyadri Kanda of the Skanda Purana has an intimate bearing on the history of Tuluva. The version in the Sahyadri Kanda is substantially the same as that related above, with the exception of a few details which will be examined presently. The story of Parashurama, dating back as it does to the times of Ramayana and before, cannot be altogether dismissed as a fascinating fabrication of the fertile Brahman brains. Even at the risk of digressing a little from the main part of our narrative, we may be permitted to make a few observations concerning this great figure, especially as gathered from the writings of Hindu writers and epigraphical records. These notices, as we shall see at once, will help us to elucidate the alleged creation of Tuluva by Jamadagnya. In the Mahabharata itself, we have a few places associated with the name and greatness of Parashurama. Proceeding next to the mountain called Mahendra, we are told in that epic, inhabited of yore by Jamadagnya, and bathing in Rama's Tirtha, a person acquireth the merit of a horse sacrifice. In the same work, we are informed that after visiting the asylum of Sharabhanga, one should proceed to Shurparaka, where Jamadagna's son had formerly dwelt. Bathing in that Tirtha of Rama, one acquireth the merit of giving away gold in abundance. Dhaumya relates to Bharata further that in that same Shurparaka Tirtha are 2 sacrificial platforms of the illustrious Jamadagni called Pashana and Punaschandra. The Markandeya Purana informs us that along the northern half of the Sahya mountains is the region in which the Godavari flows and which is delightful even when compared with the whole world. And Govardhana is the charming city of the high-souled Bhargava race. References to Parashurama and his creations on the west coast are also found in the Raghuvamsha, where Kalidasa gives clear evidence of the legend having been current in about the 5th century AD. While describing Raghu's march through the Sahya regions and Kerala and the adjoining lands on the west coast, Kalidasa says that when Raghu's vast spread out in view of conquering the west, the sea, though at one time sent back by the missiles of Parashurama, now appeared as if touching. Then again, it is mentioned, continues the poet, that the ocean, when entreated, gave space to Parashurama. The same ocean now paid tribute to Raghu through the kings of the West. In a later context, Kalidasa informs us that Prince Pratipa, having obtained the god of fire as an ally in battle, he considers the sharp edge of Parashurama's axe, which is the very destructive knife to the Kshatriyas, to be no more than the petal of a lotus. While narrating the story of Parashurama himself, Kalidasa informs us that he destroyed the Kshatriyas 21 times. Allusions to the ruler of Mahishmati, Sahasrabahu Arjuna, and Parashurama are made by Bana in his Kadambari. A portress who approaches King Shudraka with some news is thus described: like the blade of Parashurama's axe, she held the circle of kings in submission. Then again, the parrot Vaishampayana relates how it saw the Shabara army coming out from the forests of the Vindhyas. It was like the stream of Narmada tossed by Arjuna's 1,000 arms. While describing Chandrapeda's deftness in the use of arms, Bana writes that his shafts, like those of Parashurama, when the latter blazed to consume the forest of earth's royal stems, cleft only the highest peaks. Even the account of a foreign writer of the 16th century AD contains echoes of the old legend. Duarte Barbosa thus remarked while writing about Tuluvanadu, which he called Tulinat. And the Indians say that in former times all these low grounds were sea, which reached to the said range, that is the Western Ghats, and that in process of time the sea uncovered it and swallowed it up in other paths and to the foot of those mountains. There are many traces of things of the sea, and the low ground is very level like the sea, and the mountain chain is very craggy and seems to rise to the heavens. We have to come to the 16th century, therefore, to meet with people who ascribed the origin of the western coast and with it the beginnings of the province, the history of which forms the subject of our narrative, not to the doings of a remarkable personage, but to a subterranean agency in some Paleolithic period, which the ancients masked under the guise of a legend. Nevertheless, the achievements of Parashurama have been recorded in epigraphs ranging from the first quarter of the 6th century AD to the first quarter of the 16th century. The Ganga king Durvinita Konginivriddha, who ascended the throne in AD 482, is called in the Nallala plates issued by himself and dated in his 40th regnal year, that is AD 522 to 3, an incarnation of Parashurama in the art of using astras, upastras, and other weapons. The Western Charukya ruler Vinayaditya Satyashraya, son of Pulikeshin II, is praised thus in a record dated AD 692, that he was reckoned to be an elephant god to kings like Parashurama. This is repeated in an inscription of AD 694. Sri Purusha Shokongunivarma II, the Ganga king, is said in a record dated AD 749 to be in valor like the son of Jamadagni. This eulogy in regard to the same valiant monarch is repeated in AD 776 and again in AD 797. Even in the reign of the Ganga king Yerayappa Nitimarga II, an inscription dated AD 903 describes Sri Purusha Prithvi Kongunivarma II to be in valor Jamadagnya. Rajendra Chola Deva of AD 1016 to AD 1064 is credited with the conquest of a great many forts and cities, and especially with the performance of a deed which is in all respects singular in the history of Parashurama. Inscriptions ranging from AD 1019 till about AD 1101 maintain that the great Tamil ruler conquered many ancient islands securely guarded from time immemorial by the sea, resounding with conches, and the crown of pure gold worthy of Lakshmi, which Parashurama, who in anger extirpated kings 21 times in battle, had deposited in the inaccessible Sandima, also called Shandima, and in one record Chandimat island, having considered it a secure place. Chandimat is a corruption of Shantimat or Shantimanta, and it may be identified with the island Shanti mentioned in the Tulu Grama Paddhati as having formed one of the 77 islands which belonged to Gaurashtra on the western coast of India. But no further details concerning this island are available either in history or legend. Vinayaditya Satyashraya was not the only Western Chalukya ruler whose warlike activities are associated with Parashurama. The famous Vikramaditya VI, more commonly called Tribhuvana Malla II, and Vikramanka, who ascended the throne in AD 1073 to 1074, is thus described in a record dated AD 1077. The resoluteness of him who, in order to destroy the Kshatriyas in the earth, slew the kings 21 times. This remarkable achievement of Parashurama is also connected with the rise of one of the feudatories of some of the same great Western Chalukya monarch. An inscription dated only in the 38th year of the king Vikramaditya VI, that is in AD 1112, dealing with the origin of his feudatory Dadiga, son of King Gunda of the Bali race and of the Bapura family, ruler over Kishukad, says the following. When Jamadagnya came in the course of his wanderings, in which he destroyed the Kshatriya race, there were born from the caves of Mount Kishkinda certain heroes from whom sprang the members of the Bali race, who are the ornaments of the Bapuras. Vishnuvardhana Bittiga Deva is thus praised in a record dated AD 1160. To King Narasimhavarma, a Chola ruler, he was like an axe to a tree or Pashurama to Sahasrabahu. This wonderful king Vishnu became the destroyer 100 times of Kshatriyas. Rulers on the eastern coast too were associated with the name of Parashurama, but this time it is with one of his singular characteristic features. The Mahamandaleshwara Konda Padmati Buddharaja, who belonged to the Shudra caste, is called in AD 1171 to 2 a Parashurama in keeping vows. But it is generally the monarchs of the Karnataka and the western parts of India whose martial deeds reminded the people of the valor of Parashurama. Of the Kalachuriya king Raya Murari Surideva, of the Kalachuriya king Raya also called Soma, an inscription dated AD 1174 relates thus. His guru Ashwathama, causing with affection the moustaches and beard of that Soma to grow thick, as if for ornament, when Parashurama, with a raging fire of fury, came to swallow up the kings, with great affection preserved him, and together with a sign or crest, the name of Kalachuri to that family, this Ishwaramsa. Veera Narasimha II of AD 1220 to 1235 of the Hoysala dynasty is described in a record dated AD 1223 to be stronger than Parashurama. The earliest story of Parashurama having reclaimed the land is given in an inscription dated AD 1368 thus. Having turned back the ocean and conquered the earth, the acme of might and liberality, the sole repository of fame was Jamadagnya, who, seeing the Kshatriyas that from enjoying the earth were filled with pride, made it as far as encircled by the ocean the possession of the Brahmins. Reminiscence of the pious deeds of Parashurama in Karnataka as well as in the regions around it may now be mentioned. A defaced inscription dated AD 1538, the times of the Vijayanagara monarch Achyutaraya, informs us that Parashurama had set up the image of the goddess Kolala in the Punya Kshetra of Dahana Kolala and that in the same year the name of that holy place was changed into Kola Bhargava. The god in the at Lakkondanhalli in the Hosakote is said to have been set up by Parashurama according to the Sthala Mahatmya of the locality. Hiramagalur in the Kadur district, as the Sthala Mahatmya of that place relates, was once the residence of 9 Siddhas or saints who performed penance near the pond in the village known as Siddha Pushkarani. It then became the residence of Parashurama. An image of Rama was set up there. The town also contains a singular memorial. It is the temple of Parashu or the axe of the hero. The town was rechristened as Bhargavapuri. Sorab Taluka is the Surabhi which was Jamadagni's possession. The temple of Renuka, mother of Parashurama, existing to this day at Chandragutti, is said to mark the spot where she burnt herself on the funeral pyre of her husband. And the temple of Kolalamma at Kolar is said to have been erected in her honor from Kartavirya's having been slain there. The colloquy with Sagara is said to have been held near Tirthahalli. It was here at Tirthahalli that Parashurama stood and aimed his axe at Sagara, as is also narrated in the Grama Paddhati of Tuluva. There is a processional image of wood representing Parashurama in the village called Chikkanayakkanahalli, Palya, a small village 12 miles west of Hassan on the Hassan Sakleshpur road, is reckoned to have been the hermitage of the Jamadagni. Tuluva too has places which are associated with the memories and doings of Parashurama. 3 miles north of Udupi lies the village of Puttur, which contains a temple of Durga Bhagavati, said to have been established by Parashurama. Although the origin of this temple is according to us quite different, as we shall point out in a later context, yet popular conception connects it with Parashurama. It is said that he established the image of Durga Bhagavati in that temple. Besides this image, Parashurama is said to have erected 3 Durga images and 4 Nagalayas around Udupi. The Durgalayas were those at Kunjaru, Kannarapadi and Indrani or Indrali or Indralli. The 4 Nagalayas were those of Aritodu, Tangodu, Mangodu and Muchalagodu, all of them being in the Udupi Taluka. Udupi or Rajatapetha itself, one of the 7 holy places in Tuluva, is said to owe its existence to Parashurama's piety. The other 6 centers were Kumaradri, modern Subramanya, Kumbhakasi, modern Kota, Dvajeshwara, modern Koteshwara, Kroda, modern Shankaranarayana, Mukamba, modern Kolluru, and Gokarna, now in North Canara. The temple of Renuka at Kunjaranagari, a village about 8 miles to the southeast of Udupi, is considered very holy because of the image of Renuka, which according to the Sthala Mahatmya of the locality, Parashurama installed in memory of his mother. The Sthala Mahatmya of Kadirika asserts that Parashurama made a sacrificial fire which the Kanapati of the north turned into an altar in later days. The region immediately to the south of Tuluva, Kerala, also owed its origin to Parashurama. At least so it is related in the traditional accounts of that province called Keralotpatti. These legendary accounts of Kerala, which will presently be cited, are, however, more confusing than those of Tuluva. We may briefly note here how Parashurama has figured in the annals of other provinces as well. Thus, for instance, it is related in the traditions of the Khatris how, when he was exterminating the Kshatriyas, a pregnant girl escaped and took shelter with a Saraswata Brahman. When questioned by the pursuers, the Brahman said that she was his cook, Katrut, and to prove it, ate bread of her hands. Parashurama is also mentioned in the traditions of the Nirmand Brahmans of the Satluj and of the Palyas of Bihar. It is maintained by some that a few sculptures in the Konark temple in Orissa represent the shooting of arrows by Parashurama. Commenting on one of the bas reliefs at Badami, Dr. Charpentier remarked that the Shurpa or winnowing basket found thereon may be possibly referred to Parashurama. Section 3. Examination of the story relating to the alleged creations of Parashurama. The detailed references to Parashurama's character and valor given above, while they prove the extreme popularity of the great personage and of the veneration in which he was held, especially in the Karnataka and Tamil regions, do not contain notices of his creations which deserve now to be examined also with the aid of literary and epigraphical evidence. That Parashurama cleared the earth of the Kshatriyas 21 times, tradition, literary works, and inscriptions unanimously agree. In the version of his story as given in the Mahabharata and repeated in the Vishnu Purana as mentioned above, we said that Parashurama gave the earth to the ministering priests who, with the permission of Kashyapa, divided it amongst themselves. It was also further observed that Jamadagnya retired to the seashore of the south on being told by Kashyapa that he had no place anywhere to reside. These two details seem to have furnished later writers with matter for the construction of an ingenious story which is best described in the Sahyadri Kanda of the Skanda Purana. Narrated in the briefest words, it is the following: that Parashurama stood on a particular spot, threw his battle axe into or as some spear, shot his arrows at the ocean, and with the land thus relinquished to him by Sagara, formed 7 divisions known as the Sapta Konkanas. Of these 7 divisions, Tuluva was one. A minuter division was made of the land into gramas or villages which were distributed amongst the Brahmins. After a series of events which need not be described here, he retired to the Mahendra mountain. The Sahyadri Kanda asserts that he stood on the top of the Sahyachalasya Shikare Stitaha. This spot may be identified with Tirthahalli, mentioned both in the Sthala Mahatmyas of the Karnataka as well as those of Tuluva, and not with Mount Delhi as remarked by Wilson long ago. As to the place where Parashurama finally retired, we are told that it was the Mahendra mountain on the southern spurs of the from where Hanuman is said to have leaped on to Lanka. Now we come to the main part of the story of Parashurama, with which we are concerned, with the acquisition of a large stretch of country from the ocean by him, his alleged division of the land into 7 districts, one of which was called Tuluva, and the distribution of these 7 provinces among the Brahmins as given in the Sahyadri Kanda and in the traditional accounts of Tuluva called the Grama Paddhati. ब्राह्मणानां ततः पृथ्वीदानं दत्वा यथा वीदिः नवीनं निर्मितं क्षेत्रं शूर्पारकम् अनुत्तमं वैतरण्या दक्षिणे तु सुब्रह्मण्य तथा उत्तरे सह्यात् सागर पर्यन्तं शूर्पारकं व्यवस्थितम्. This would make the country reclaimed from the sea 100 yojanas in length and 3 yojanas in breadth from the Vaitarani near Nashik in the north to Subramanya in the south. The faithfulness of the authors of Skanda Purana to one detail given in the Mahabharata is apparent when we read in the above extract that this excellent and newly created place was christened Surparaka district. This was the name, as we have noted above, given to the new province in the Shanti Parva. We may observe here that the Grama Paddhati of Tuluva, based out to some extent as it was on the Sahyadri Kanda, also confirms the detail concerning the length and breadth of the new province, but adds a few more details which were obviously the outcome of indigenous intellect. Thus, one version of the Grama Paddhati depicts Parashurama as having taken his stand on the Simha written in some versions Samya mountain, which is evidently an error for Sahya mountain, and of having secured a stretch of territory 3 yojanas in extent from the Simha mountain and 30 yojanas from Kanyakumari to Triambaka. A more accurate version of the same work, ascribed to one Bhattacharya, gives the length of the province as 100 yojanas from Nashik in the north to Kanyakumari in the south, and 3 yojanas in breadth from the Sahya mountain to the western sea. The Sahyadri Kanda tells us also that the Jamadagnya created the Saptakotishvara Tirthas with which we are not concerned here. In a later passage, we have the statement that he gave 12 gramas to Brahmins. Nissarayitum ambunam alayam sagaram tada gramanam dvadashanam tu parimanena bhargavaha. And then we have the names of the famous 7 divisions of the new land given thus: Kerala, Tuluva, that is Tuluva evidently, Haiva, Saurashtra, Konkana, Karahata, and Karnataka. These were the well-known Sapta Konkanas of Western India. While the fact of his having reclaimed the Surparaka province from the ocean and of his having established the Sapta Kotishvaras, dividing certain tracts into 12 gramas amongst Brahmins, is thus narrated in the epics and the Puranas, it is not told anywhere that he formed the 7 districts mentioned above. The epics and the Puranas, excluding the Sahyadri Kanda, do not speak of the Sapta Konkanas as having been created by him. To the absence of this important detail in the Puranas, we may add 2 considerations to prove that the Sapta Konkanas cannot be ascribed to Parashurama at all. In the elaborate description of the activities of Kartavirya and of his sons, and of the discomfiture which Parashurama suffered at the hands of Dasharatha's son Rama, as given by Kalidasa, whose acquaintance with the traditional origin of a part of the western coast we have already seen, no mention is made of the Sapta Konkanas at all. On the other hand, Kalidasa merely informs us that Parashurama had given the whole earth bounded by the ocean to the deserving Brahmins. Thus does Parashurama himself tell Rama, even the opposite of victory, that is defeat inflicted by thee, the primeval being, is certainly agreeable to me, who have reduced to ashes the enemies of my father, and who have made over the whole earth bounded by the oceans to the deserving. Bhasmasat kritavatah pitridvishah atrasatcha vasudham sasagaram ahitah jaya viprayoyopi me eva parameshtinat. Reference to the creation of the Sapta Konkanas by the Parashurama proves that the legend of Sapta Konkanas must have originated poet's time, that is, after the 5th or the 6th century AD. Another consideration which goes to confirm the above assertion is the diversity of opinion among the writers of the story as regards the names of the districts that comprise the Sapta Konkanas. The Sahyadri Kanda includes among the Konkanas the name Tulunga. Such a variant of the name Tuluva is not met with in any of the hitherto discovered historical records or traditional accounts of the district. Instead of highway mentioned in the Sahyadri Kanda, we have Govarashtra in other accounts. Saurashtra of the same Purana is called Varalatta in other versions, Varalatta. And instead of Karnata, other accounts add Barbara. Further, the Sapta Konkanas given in some southern accounts contain the names Virata and Maratha instead of Karnata and Saurashtra mentioned in the Sahyadri Kanda. The confusion is carried further in the Keralotpatti, some versions of which practically deny the Sapta Konkanas altogether. They bring forward an altogether new division of the ancient units thus: Tuluva, Mushika, and Kerala. The unknown writer of a work called Prapancha Hridayam, the date of which is unfortunately not determinable, confirms the existence of the 3 names but also adds others to make up the Sapta Konkanas. After describing the 7 mountain ranges, Rikshavat, Mahendra, Vindhya, Malaya, Sahya, Shuktimat, and Pariyatra, the work continues to give a brief notice of Lankapuri and then speaks of the land called Parashurama Bhumi. तत्र मलयद्वीपमध्यवर्तिनो मलयपर्वतस्य मध्यमशिखरे लङ्कापुरी सा प्रसिद्धतरा सह्यपादे परशुरामभूमिः सा साप्तकोङ्कणाख्या कूपककेरळमूषिक आळुव पशुकोङ्कण परकोङ्कण भेदन दक्षिण उत्तर आयामेण च व्यवस्थिता. How 6 divisions could be termed Sapta Konkanas passes that there was never any uniformity in the mind of early writers as regards the exact nomenclature of the 7 Konkanas. And secondly, it gives another and an equally historical name of Tuluva Alva, which, as will be seen in the following pages, was used in those times to denote not only the dynasty but the province as well. Number 4. Veracity of that part of the above story relating to the Sapta Konkanas examined. Inscriptional evidence leads us to the conclusion that the legend of the creation of the so-called Sapta Konkanas may have become popular in the 11th century AD. It is true that in some inscriptions of the early times, we meet with the names of the component parts that made up the Sapta Konkanas. Thus, for instance, in a copper plate grant of the Ganga ruler Marasimha assigned to AD 786, Varata Desha in the north is said to be the country from which Sridhara Bhatta, grandfather of the famous disputant Vadigala Bhatta, hailed. Highway is mentioned in a record dated about AD 991 as having contained a temple dedicated to the goddess Gundadabbe. We may also note here that 3 of the 7 famous divisions are mentioned in a later record of the reign of King Harihara Raya II. Yellappa Odayar was in Saka 1308 AD 36 to 87, the viceroy over the Tulu, Highway and Konkan kingdoms with his capital at Barakuru. But the 7 Konkanas seem to have sprung into fame in the Karnataka records from the middle of the 11th century AD onwards. It is said of the Western Chalukya monarch Ahavamalla Trailokya Malla in a record dated AD 1054 that he terrified and forced to obey the 7 Konkanas and the 7 Malay which were united together. The Kadamba king Kirti Deva is said to have subdued 7 Konkanas as if in mere sport in a record dated AD 1077. But in Sarka AD 1076, Bhoja Deva is said to have conquered the Konkana. No mention is made of the Sapta Konkanas in this record. An ingenious explanation regarding the creation of the Sapta Konkanas by Parashurama is given in the following record dated AD 1112 to 13, which, while tracing the origin of the great feudatory family of the Pandyas, alludes thus to the achievement of Parashurama. In the Krita Yuga, to the accomplisher of this desires, Jamadagni, the husband of Renuka, was born the powerful bearer of the Parashu or axe, the slayer of the son of Kritavirya, who murdered his guru. And 21 times slaying all the kings in the world, he bestowed the circle of the earth as far as the ocean upon the Brahmans, Dharani Devar, but considering that he should not dwell in the property of the Brahmans, he turned back the sea with the tip of his bow, the son of Renuki, praised by the learned. Having left not even space, Kana, in the space occupied by the western ocean, that hero obtained from the favor of Fanikankana Shiva the 7 Konkanas as his abode. To the lady Konkana country thus created by Parashurama, Highway was like her Kankana or bracelet, in which as the beautiful chief gem shone forth Sisugali, the capital of the Pandyas of Uchangi. Krita Yugadol Jamadagnige Krita Kritiyang Ogedu Renuki Patig Angi Krita Guru Vadhanam Vadisi Krita Virat Majanam Atibalam Parashudharam Mandaladhol Dharabujaran Yirpat Ondu Sul Kondu Tad Dharani Mandalamam Samasta Dharani Devarge Vardhi Antikam Baram Ittalli ಧರಾಮರ ಸ್ವದೋಳ್ ಇರಲ್ಕಾಗೆಂದು ಪೋಗೊತ್ತಿ ಸಾಗರಂ ಚಾಪದ ಕೊರ್ಪಿನೋಳ್ ಬುದ್ಧನುತಂ ಶ್ರೀ ರೇಣುಕಿ ನಂದನಂ ಕಣಮಾತ್ರೋದಕಮಂ ಇರಲ್ಕಣಂ ಇಯದೆ ಪಶ್ಚಿಮಾಬ್ಧಿ ತೇಗೆದೆಡೆಯೋಳ್ ಕೊಂಕಣ ಸಪ್ತಕಮಂ ಫಣಿಕಂಕಣವರದೆ ನಿಜಾಶ್ರಯಾರ್ಥಂ ಆವಿಭು ಪಡೆದಂ ಅಂತೂ ಪರಶುರಾಮ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಎನಿಸಿದ ಕೊಂಕಣಧಾತ್ರಿ ವನಿತೆಯ ಕಣ್ಕಣದ್ ಏಸೆವ ಹೈವೆಯೋಳ್ ಸಿಸುಗಳಿ. Certain considerations may be leveled against this interesting record of the times of the great Western Chalukya monarch Vikramaditya VI. In the first place, the record speaks of Renuki, while the recognized form of the name, as Rice correctly remarked, is Renuka. Secondly, the poet who has thus invented a new name for Jamadagna's mother calls the Brahmans Dharani Bhuvar, a singular epithet which, while no doubt being in conformity with the traditional high status assumed by the priestly class, suggests nevertheless that in this particular instance it may have been used for reasons other than those of mere Brahmanical sanctimony. Thirdly, Parshurama is described by the scribe as turning the ocean by the tip of his bow. Here we have a peculiar detail which is not mentioned in any account of that hero. The ingenious poet brings in a fourth point which conclusively proves that he was inventing the story with an ulterior motive. He says that Shiva gave the land to Parshurama, but we have seen that both according to the Sahyadri Kanda and the traditional accounts of Tuluva, it was the ocean Varuna who relinquished the large tract of country from Nashik to Kanyakumari to Parshurama. Finally, the play upon the words Fanikankana and Kankana makes one suspect that the originator of the story was more prone to eulogize the greatness of Fanikankana or Shiva and to show the ultra-wide bent of his mind than to hand a trustworthy account of the origin of Parshurama Kshetra. Indeed, the manner in which the inscription ends completely justifies our assumption that the poet who composed the above story was a confined Saivite. ಗೊಬ್ಬೂರ ಧಾರಣ ಸರ್ವಭೌಮ ಮಲ್ಲಿಕಾರ್ಜುನ ಭಟ್ಟಂ ಸುಕವೀಂದ್ರ ಷಣ್ಮುಖಂ ಭದ್ರಂ ಅಸ್ತು ಶಿವಶಾಸನಾಯ. Of the universal emperor of mnemonics as Mallikarjuna Bhatta is styled were correct, we should have had it in the many epigraphs referring to the 7 Konkanas of the Karnataka rulers. But as is proved by the following inscriptions, there is not even the slightest reference to the above version or its variants in them. Epigraphs relating to the 7 Konkanas are many. The Santara king Jayakesi, son of Vijayaditya, is said in an inscription dated AD 1149 to have ruled over the 7 Konkanas. But in AD 1125-26, a stone tablet at Narendra represents him as governing the Konkana 900, the highway 500 and other provinces under the western Chalukya monarch Vikramaditya VI. Jayakeshi II, we may incidentally observe, was called Konkana Chakravarti or the Emperor of the Konkanas. Through the aid of Nolamba, whose full name is not given in the epigraph dated about AD 1078, the 7 Konkanas became like bracelets or Kankana to the same western Chalukya emperor Trailokya Malla Vikramaditya VI. Vijay Pandya Deva is described in records dated AD 1166 and AD 1168 to have subdued the 7 Konkanas as if in mere sport. The 7 Konkanas were conquered by the famous Hoysala ruler Vishnuvardhana Bittiga Deva. This is related in later inscriptions ranging from AD 1196 to AD 1224 of the times of the Hoysala rulers Ballala Deva II and Narasimha Deva II. It is said in these epigraphs that when Bittiga Deva appeared as a wrestler Jattiga on the battlefield, the 7 Konkanas cast away their weapons and fell into the sea. Even in AD 1396, Bachana Raya, son of Veeravasanta Madhava, under the Vijayanagara king Harihara Raya II, is called the reducer of the 7 Konkanas. We may here observe that the fame of the seven Konkanas went far beyond the limits of Karnataka kingdoms, and that, like the rulers of the western and southern India, who were credited with the subjugation of the Sapta Konkanas, the kings of the extreme north were also reputed to have conquered them. Thus, Kalhana in his Rajatarangini, while describing the Digvijaya or world conquest of Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Dakota dynasty, writes thus: then, having his triumphal cheers sounded by the music of the ocean waves, he, the first Apaschima of conquerors, proceeded to the western regions. His shining majesty, on reaching the seven Konkanas, dark with betelnut trees, appeared like that of the sun with his seven horses. Kalhana gives us a clue to the explanation of the bent on conquering the seven Konkanas, appeared like the glory of the sun with his seven horses. In other words, that ruler of Kashmir is described to have undertaken the conquest of seven imaginary territories of Western India, much the same manner as many a Karnataka king, with no doubt substantial claims for widespread conquests both in the Karnataka and Tamil lands, is supposed to have subdued the Saptakonkanas. The truth seems to be that the term Saptakonkana was purely conventional. It was used in to have ruled in AD 964. The seven Malay, over which, as is narrated in an inscription dated AD 1024, Veeranolamba read. The seven Malay and the seven Kombu, which were subdued by Vishnuvardhana Bittigadeva, as records dated AD 1134 and AD 1135, inform us. The seven islands in the middle of the ocean, which are said to have trembled before Hoysala Narasimha the first, as given in an epigraph dated AD 1169, and the seven Kalingas which were conquered according to the Tamil historical narrative Kalingattu Parani by the king of the Pallava feudatory of the Chola king. We have elsewhere proved how significant the number 7 has been in the history of Eastern thought. The attempt made by Fleet, therefore, to include the highway or Byway 500, roughly modern North Canara, the Konkana 900, modern Goa, which, however, he identifies with Revati Dvipa, the Iridige country, modern Savantawadi and Ratnagiri districts, the Konkana 1400, the northern Silaharas, now represented by Kolaba and Thana, and the Lata country, which, according to Fleet, was the name given to Surat and Baroda, under the mythological denomination of seven Konkana, seems to be both arbitrary as well as unhistorical. Section 5. References to Tuluva in the epics and the Puranas. The above explanation of the term Sapta Konkana does not aid us in the history of Tuluva. All that we may venture to suggest is that in the early days, when the recollection of a huge upheaval of the ocean was within the memory of mankind, Tuluva must have existed as a separate geographical division, and that it must have been of sufficient importance to have been included among the alleged creations of Jamadagnya. The absence of the term Sapta Konkana in inscriptions of the 9th century and earlier, and the silence which Kalidasa, for instance, maintains as regards the supposed 7 divisions of a province, the legendary origins of which, as we have narrated, he seems to have noted, prove beyond doubt that the story of the Sapta Konkanas may have originated after the times of Kalidasa, and that it received a tangible shape when the brilliant conquests of the Karnataka monarchs in the middle of the 11th century AD and onwards gave ample scope to scribes and panegyrical writers to dwell on the number 7 and to apply it to many of the provinces of southern and western India. But it must be confessed that Tuluva does not figure either in the Ramayana or in the Mahabharata as a district of political importance, and that even in some of the Puranas, as will be seen presently, no mention is made of its individual existence at all. We may account for this by saying that in the times of the epics, the Tuluvas, while they had made themselves acquainted with their neighbors, the Karnataka people, had not acquired any political status worthy of note, and that some of the writers of the Puranas were evidently ignorant of the activities of the Tuluvas, whose country, as will be shown at once, was not devoid of places of pilgrimage of considerable antiquity. One of these was Gokarna, which, as we have already seen, was one of the 17 Tirthas established by Parashurama within the limits of Tuluva. It was at Gokarna that, according to tradition, the image which Ravana brought from the mountain called Koila with the intention of carrying it off to Lanka got transfixed at the place where it now stands. Another spot is Patala Lanka, which, as Rhymes remarked, was in Canara. It is doubtful whether this is to be identified with Valalanka or Valalanke, a suburb of Mulki in Tuluva. The hill Kunjaragiri, located in the south in the Ramayana and hitherto unidentified, was no other than the Kunjaragiri of above as a holy place near Udupi, associated with the memories of Parashurama. It is mentioned in the Brihat Samhita as a Desha, but under a slightly different name, Kunjaradari, and located in the same Tamraparna. The evidence of Brihat Samhita agrees with that of the Markandeya Purana to be cited presently. Certain names of rivers, hilltops, and places mentioned in the Mahabharata and the Puranas bear a strong similarity to those found in Tuluva. In the topographical list given in the Bhishma Parva, a people called Utulus are mentioned after the Abhisaras and before the Saivalas. We do not know whether this name has to be referred to the Tulus. Neither are we in a position to assert whether the Pratyas placed after the Keralas and before the Mushikas in the same Parva were in any way connected with the Tulus. Among the 7 Kula Parvatas described in the same list, we have of course Sahya, the eastern boundary of Tuluva. The Kumari river mentioned after the Vrishabhaya before Rishikulya in the same context bears a strong resemblance to the Kumaradhari of Tuluva, although it must be admitted that there are greater reasons for identifying it with its namesake in Bihar. The Kumari is mentioned in the Agni and Markandeya Puranas too, where it is said to rise in the Shuktiman mountains. The Padma Purana likewise speaks of it, but in manner to justify one's doubt that there may have been some confusion in the mind of the compilers of the Puranas between the rivers that flowed in the north and those in the south. For the Padma Purana, following the Bhishma Parva, no doubt, locates the Kumari after the Vrishasa and before Rishikulya in the north. But the same Purana groups the Kumari and the Sukumari together with the Mahanadi and the Sita and describes them as flowing in the Shakadvipa. The Vishnu Purana too places the Kumari in the same Dvipa but mentions another river, the Nalini, which recalls the Nalini of Tuluva. The Vayu Purana and the Matsya Purana likewise mention the Kumari but under the name Sukumari. The Vayu Purana mentions Indrakila, which is the ancient name of Aduru, a village 17 miles east of Kasaragodu, where there is an old sculptured Shiva temple fabled to have been founded by Arjuna. It is now in ruins but is said to have been repaired about 500 years ago. According to Tuluva tradition, Manipura, an island which lies on the way from Udupi to Hangarakatta, is said to have been the Manipura which Arjuna visited on his way from Mahendra in the south while going to Gokarna in the north. About a mile and a half to the east of Udupi lies the village of Indrani, also known as Indralli. The Sthala Mahatmya of this locality says that Arjuna spent a few days here and was carried aloft to Amravati by Indra, hence the name Indralli, Indrahalli. The above places, which are supposed to have been visited by Arjuna, leave out of account numerous stones, caves, and wells alleged to have been constructed by the Pandavas in the course of their exile. The Markandeya Purana, however, speaks of 3 important hilltops of Tuluva: Pushpagiri, Kutashaila, and Kunjaragiri. The Pushpagiri, located in that work after Pandara and before Durjayanta, may be identified with Pushpagiri, 5,667 feet high, on which stands the famous temple of Subramanya in Tuluva. In the same Purana, mention is made of Kutashaila after Gomanta and before Kritasmara. This was no other than the well-known hill top Kutashaila, also called as Kudashadri, 4,400 feet, 17 miles from Kundapuru. The same work locates the people of Kanchi, the Telangas, Telungus, Tulungus, and those who dwell in Kunjaradari, Kacha, Cochin, and Tamraparni in the tortoise's right flank. The Mount Kunjara referred to here is no doubt the same hill we have mentioned above as being one of the famous hills near Udupi, on which the people of Renuka stands, and as having been mentioned in the Ramayana and the Brihat Samhita. We may also note here that one of the rivers described in the Markandeya Purana may perhaps with some reservations be identified with its namesake in Tuluva. This is the Suktimati. It may be identified with the Shuktimati of Tuluva, also known as the Gangavadi or the Gangolli or the Gurget. It flows by Shankaranarayana and is called further down Haladi Hole. The Brahmanda Purana also mentions the Kuta Shaila after Kutaka and before Tungaprastha, and the Pushpagiri after Hariparvata and before Jayanta. While the Vayu Purana locates the Kuta Shaila after Karu and Pushpagiri after Godanagiri and before Ujjayanta. In all likelihood, the river Payoshni, placed after Dasta and before the Devika in the Bhishma Parva, was the Payashwani or Chandragiri river or Tuluva. The Padma Purana evidently follows the Bhishma Parva when it locates the Payoshni after the Vitasta and before the Devika. But the same Purana places the Payoshni after the Sharavati and before the Bhima, thus justifying our assumption that the Payoshni was perhaps meant for the Payaswani of Tulava. But the Matsya Purani describes it as flowing from the Vindhya mountain. Whatever may be the difficulty in our identification of this river, we see that the name Payoshni and Payaswani bear close relation. Bhavishottara Purana has a long of the origin of the longest river of Tuluva, the Netravati. It is said that when once the powerful giant Hiranyaksha carried away the earth to Patala or the nether regions, the gods in fear ran to Vishnu, who was then living in the Shweta Dvipa. In order to appease the gods, Vishnu took the shape of a boar, killed the giant, and saved the world. When he was resting on the Veda Parvata, the right tusk of the boar broke there, and there gushed forth the river Bhadra. From the left tusk, which was longer than the other, there sprang the sister river Tunga. Simultaneously, a third issued from the eyes of the boar, and this was the Netravati. The two former, taking different courses, unite in the east at Kudali, running thenceforth under the name of Tungabhadra, while the third one, the Netravati, goes in the opposite direction below the Ghats and unites with the Kumari river mentioned above. Section number 6, claims of Tuluva to antiquity. Not till we come to the epigraphical records of the Karnataka kings of the early centuries of the Christian era and to the accounts of foreign geographers of the same period do we get any reliable data concerning the existence of Tuluva as an independent political unit. Before we deal with this part of the narrative, we may dispense with the attempts made by some to identify Tuluva with one of the principalities given in the rock edicts of Ashoka. In the second rock edict at Girnar, in the second rock edict at Kalsi, the name Satyaputa is mentioned after the Pandyas and before the Ketalaputa or Keralaputa. Speculation has been rife as regards this word Satyaputa. It has been imagined that the Satyaputa mentioned in the rock edicts refers to Tuluva under the name of Satyabhumi. Some have attempted to connect the word Satyaputa with the Satvatas who are supposed to have occupied Tuluva. Wherever else the Satyaputa of the rock edicts may be located, it cannot be identified with Tuluva. We shall see while dealing with the political history of the district that the supposed identity of the Satvatas and of the Chutus with the rulers of the district does not rest on any historical grounds. Now, in regard to the other statement that the Satyaputa of the rock edicts was the same as the Satyabhumi of the early writers and that it may be equated with Tuluva, we may observe the following. On the strength of the Tamil classic Hananuru and the Shilappadikaram, which are said to be the products of the so-called Sangam age, it is asserted that Tulunadu was a separate province in the early centuries of the Christian era. In the Aham poem 294, the Tulunadu is located to the west of the Yerumai Nadu, in Sanskrit Mahishamandala, which lay immediately to the north of Tamilagam or the Tamil country proper. The Aham poem 24 as the anthology of erotic subjects said to have been compiled by Uruthirathamman under the patronage of Pandya king Ugra Peruvaldi is called, also informs us that the Tulu country was occupied by the Koshas. From the epithet given to the kosher in the Sangam works, which that they were addicted to the habit of speaking the truth, it is supposed that they can be identified with the Satya or Satyaputtas of the Ashokan edicts. The koshers who attended the installation of the goddess Pattani by the Chera king Sengutuvan, as mentioned in the Silappadikaram, are imagined to have been the inhabitants of Tuluva. Since these events are assigned to the 2nd century AD, it is conjectured that Tuluva at the time was a separate political division having friendly dealings with the Tamil kingdoms. These attractive arguments deserve to be examined not only on the basis of the epigraphs and tradition concerning Tuluva, but also with the aid of the very classical works which are assigned to the Sangam age in Tamil history. To start with, it may be said that the age of Sangam poets itself is by no means a settled question. Apart from this consideration, it is doubtful whether the 9 poets who are said to have made up the galaxy of the Sangam age lived at one and the same time. Moreover, it is permissible to question the validity of the statement of those who assign the 1st or the 2nd century AD to the Sangam poets on the strength of the classic Silappadikaram. If the Chera king Sengutuvan mentioned in the Silappadikaram is the same Chera king of Vanji, the great Sengutuvan, who is represented in the other Tamil gem Manimekalai as having reduced all the land to the same condition as that of his own hill territory, who is said to have marched at the head of his army up the banks of the Ganges, and who celebrated victories by wearing the garland of Vahai, then it is doubtful whether the Shilappadikaram can be assigned to the 1st or the 2nd century AD, and whether the statement made in it referring to the Koshas and therefore to the supposed occupation of Tuluva by those people can be given much credence. For the Silappadikaram would then have to be placed posterior to the Manimekalai, the date of which itself is still a matter of dispute. This would bring the age of Silappadikaram to about AD 756. If this age is accepted, we cannot credit the Koshars with the occupation of Tuluva, since in the 7th century AD, the Tuluvas had risen into prominence under an indigenous royal family. Turning to the verse 4 of the Aham, which speaks of Tulunadu as having been to the west of Verumai Nadu, which some identify with Mysore, we may observe that there is no evidence to prove that in the early centuries of the Christian era, Mysore was ever called by that name. Since the poets of the Sangam age do not speak of the earlier names by which the more famous parts of the Karnataka country were known, example, Kalabappu, modern Chandragiri Hill, Punnata, Kuntala, etc., we may dispense with the assertion that the Mahisha Mandala refers to Mysore in the 1st or 2nd century AD. Hence, the assertion made in verse 294 of the Aham is not of much value for determining the antiquity of Tuluva. We now come to the third argument based on the statements of the writers of the Sangam age, viz. That the Koshars, who were given to the habit of speaking the truth, occupied Tuluva. That the land hence came to be known as Satyabhumi, or the country of truth-speaking people, and that this was no other than the Satyaputa of the Asokan edicts. These arguments seem to be plausible, especially when we take into consideration the explanation of the term Satyaputa offered by doctors Luders and Przyrski, with that Pali Putta, that is Sanskrit Putra, at the end of compounds frequently means belonging to a tribe, and that the Satvatas were Shatakarnis. This would mean that Tuluva was the land inhabited by the Satvatas, that is Shatakarnis. It may also be argued that the Satyaputa of the rock edicts is precisely the word Satyaputra occurring in the code of the legendary Tuluva lawgiver Bhuthala Pandya, who is supposed to have lived in the second century of the Christian era, and to whom the law of inheritance through the female is ascribed. Further, it may also be suggested that one of the earliest inhabitants of Tuluva were the Korgars, who are well known for their truthfulness and who has become proverbial. These arguments, if considered sound, would settle once for all the question of the antiquity of Tuluva as an independent political unit in the early centuries AD. But they are untenable on the following grounds. The Koragars, who may be credited with the ownership of the land in Tuluva in some remote period of her history, were no doubt a tribe noted for their honesty and straight dealing. But as we have shown elsewhere, the Koragars of Tuluva formed a branch of a wild tribe spread over the whole of India. Of speaking the truth is shared no doubt by the Koragars along with other Aboriginal people who do not figure in this treatise. Moreover, the Koragars do not seem ever to have been called koshas at all in their folk songs. Further, there is no agreement among scholars as to where the koshas settled. According to some, the koshas lived in the Kongunadu, which corresponds roughly to the modern Coimbatore and Salem districts. Tuluva was never in any period of her history part of the Kongu Desha. And it cannot be that the Koshars inhabited both the Kongudesha and Tuluva at the same time, since that would have given them some sort of political status which would have its traces in history or legend. But the history of Tuluva is silent in regard to this point. As regards the story of Bhuthala Pandya, we shall see in the course of this treatise that the story relating to him cannot be assigned to such an early age at all. Finally, it may be asserted that in none of the epigraphical records of Tuluva is there the slightest reference either to the name Satyabhumi or Koshar or Satvata or Shatakarni. We shall presently see that Tuluva was under a powerful indigenous dynasty which has left valuable records behind it. We conclude, therefore, that much reliance cannot be placed on the occupation of Tuluva by the Koshars in the early centuries of Christian era. It is nevertheless evident that when the Tamil writers wrote their anthologies, the name of Tuluva had spread far into the Tamil land. Indeed, the traditions of the Tondai Mandalam referred to the colonization of some parts of that country by the Tuluva Vellalars in the days of Kulothunga Chola Deva and of his son Adondai Chakravarti. But these activities of the Tulu people refer to the 10th and the 11th centuries AD, when they had already become conspicuous in the annals of both the Tamil and the Karnataka lands. Foreign geographers are more interested than the Sangam authors concerning the important kingdoms and ports in Tuluva in the early centuries AD. We may venture to suggest here that if the evidence of the Greek Kannada farce discovered so far back as 1899 at Oxyrhynchus in Egypt and given at the end of this narrative could be accepted, we should have a further proof of the importance of Tuluva in the history of India. It has been rightly maintained that the Barase of Pliny AD 23 to AD 79 was no other than Bassaruru, the Barcelore of medieval days. Tommy, middle of the 2nd century AD, speaks of a town called Maganur in the midst of the false mouth and the Barrios. What the later word Barrios stands for, it is difficult to say. But the false mouth of the river evidently refers to the dangerous place where the Netravati meets the sea, and was no doubt Mangaluru. This was the same Magaraut which Cosmos Indicopleustes, a merchant who adhered strictly to truth and who was the author of Christian topography, middle of the 6th century AD, mentions as having been one of the 5 ports of what he calls Malay. Eliot writes of Kasiri as quoting a manuscript in which Mangalore is mentioned at the beginning of the 7th century AD. One of the most well-known ports in Tuluva was Barakuru, called Fakanur and Barakanuru. This, it must be confessed, is not mentioned by the Greek geographers. It may be due to the fact that, as we shall later see, on whether we shall trace its history, Kuru came into prominence both as a commercial center and as a provincial seat of the local rulers only from the 11th century onwards. While dealing with the inland towns of a people whom he called pirates, Ptolemy speaks of Olaikora. This has been rightly identified with Alva Kheda the annals of which now deserve to be described in detail. End of the chapter. Next is chapter 2, the Alupa dynasty, which we will handle in next video. Now I'm going to close this video. Before closing this video, one of a couple of comments. Goodness, Saletore seems to be one of the most terrible of historians. He seems to have swallowed whole stories of Puranas and epics, and seems to be a Hindu nationalist who wanted to rewrite the British histories. And his historical method is very, very poor. He takes a lot of things as historical which might not be historical in any scientific sense. And also he seems to be both a pro-Brahmin and as a pro-Bunt fellow, and also pro-Karnataka fellow, probably living in the Maratha territory, Pune College. He was very conscious of Karnataka heritage and wanted to identify himself with pan-Karnatakaism. So I don't know what all the factors went into into the making of his mind, but actually his mind is quite terrible. I'm doubtful whether I'll be reading the next chapters in any recent time. It will take me some time before I get my aversion to his kind of history, aversion to his writing before I get back to this book. I feel all these things right now.